everybody for coming today to rethink the way you irrigate and landscape. Welcome to our home and to the head of Root Quencher and Indeed Irrigation. And we're just so thankful that you're here today on this warm summer day. Hope everybody's gotten something to drink and to eat. And I'm going to introduce my partners behind me here that they're going to be doing segments right after me. I'm going to be covering subsurface watering and talking about what's available on the market and what we're doing specifically at Root Quencher, and give you kind of an overview of everything that's going on in that space. And then Brian Maisenbacher is going to be talking about home composting, a little bit of farming. Brian is a farmer and a soil scientist and has been instrumental in a lot of the over 100 varieties of plants and trees we have here on the property. And then Nick Federoff, St. Nick as I call him, is going to be covering espaliering trees, and he'll be talking about plant health as well, but he'll be walking around the property and showing us some of the unique things that we've done that we think could be of value to you and your businesses. So this is really all about just sharing information with everybody, a little bit of fellowship, getting to know people, and hopefully having a good time this afternoon with some good food and drink. So welcome, and I'm going to dive right in. So subsurface watering is not a new thing. It's honestly been going around for probably thousands of years. It's been commercially available for about 10 years, 10, 15 years. And people have been cutting, 2, 3, 4 inch PVC pipe and drilling holes in it for years. So long about 10 years ago, our friends at Hunter and Rainbird started putting out some products, and I brought some of those products today. So they're very simple, straightforward devices that install right under the ground and connect into your existing irrigation system. In the case of Rainbird and Hunter, they have a mesh screen that is 360 degrees around, and they have a, I believe, 0.3 gallon per hour bubbler inside the unit. So, and they have 5 different sizes. So they have the small guy I just showed you, a couple before this size, and then the big guy here. And obviously they're set up, depending on what the depth of root is for the trees, you would use a different depth of device. Pretty simple and straightforward. The Hunter devices, and by the way, these are all very similarly priced on the market. And I would imagine from a wholesale standpoint for you contractors that it would be something that with reasonable margins for you to make some money on the devices as well. Hunter has a similar device with a similar mesh. Again, a bubbler unit. They all have slightly different types of caps that are available, but generally the devices rely on water going in the ground and the capillary action of the water in the soil moving out. And in this case, it moves out 360 degrees around the device. And typically what we found is within 10 or 15 minutes with a loamy sandy soil, you can cover 18 inches to 3 feet, as much as 3 feet out. So subsurface watering is quite effective, and as you walk around the property today, you'll see no sprinkler heads except for the lawns. You'll see drip grids everywhere, and in our case, it's root quenchers and juniors and spikes, but it's all subsurface watering. So the thriving plants and trees have been watered subsurface for, in some cases, up to 3.5 years now. Moving on to a couple of other devices. Deep Drip has an interesting, very, very durable stake. I think, again, they have 5 different sizes. The cap removes, and you take a drip line and a bubbler or a spray head, and you can install that inside of here, and you can literally hammer this into the ground. It's very, very hard plastic, and it hooks up to a drip line. And so depending on whatever kind of emitter you put out, that's how much water is going to go in the device. And they have they have devices. This is, I think, the 8-inch device, and then they have ones that actually go even farther than this down in the ground. So that's another device available. Another interesting product that I actually find cool for spot fertilizing needs is this is the Yard Butler, and it literally just hooks up to a hose, and you jam it in the ground and you inject water or fertilizer into the ground, into the roots. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. So what I wanted to show you a little bit about today is the root quencher. So again, the Rainbird's products, Hunter's products, Deep Drip is a little bit different product. I think one of the issues I have with their longer tree stakes is that with the drip emitters that are available to go inside of here, you'd have to kind of finagle something to get really enough water to even satisfy, a pine tree. Although a pine tree doesn't need a lot of water because it's got a 50-foot taproot, but still you need to. I'm not sure how effective this is with the watering connection. We did some testing early on with this, and the device itself is amazing. It's got nice perforated holes all around, so it's a good device. And again, this is not specifically, even though I'm with Root Quencher, this is not specifically promoting Root Quencher. I want you to see all of what's available on the market, so that you can make your own decisions. The way we designed the Root Quencher, the main device, is that it's adjustable. So instead of having 5 different devices, you have one device. And if you have shallow roots, you can install it at 9 inches. In the case of these blueberries, they're 9 to 12 inches roots, so I believe the device is installed about like that. But you can adjust it all the way down to 22 inches for fruit trees, for example, which is what you'll see in both of our orchards. So the device will go down 22 inches, fully extended. And one of the advantages we think we have is that we can actually control the direction of the water. So we've made these holes in the side. Instead of having a perforated channel, we actually have directional plugs that plug into the unit so that you can force the water out in a particular way. So if you were installing it next to a tree and the tree is here, you can put directional plugs back here and the water will push this way. We also have drain holes at the bottom so that water doesn't collect in the device over time, because that is one of the big questions from a lot of irrigation professionals is, well, is our roots going to grow into this? Is it going to end up busting it over time? And I would say with 3.5 years of testing so far, no. We've actually installed, dug up, reinstalled. Greg has done a lot of that. And we haven't seen any root invasion at all. And I think it's because the water is flowing out and through capillary action moving away from the device. And in the case of, broken sprinkler pipes and sewer lines and things like that, the water is sitting there in the pipe. So no water actually sits in this pipe. So the root quencher also has an adjustable valve, so you don't have to worry about getting the right bubbler. And even though the bubblers tend to be pressure compensating, I'll use air quotes for that, this valve allows you to control the flow on site. If you've got 150 feet of drip line connected to 5 root quenchers, you can balance the flow for that particular zone and have complete control over what's going on. The original way we designed it was that it was going to run with sprinkler heads, so it would run for 10 minutes. We'd fill it up fully. This thing fully filled is 1 gallon of water. So we ideally wanted it to fill up one time for a fruit tree, and we have to kind of, that's why I keep saying rethink. We have to rethink the way that we water, because every piece of information out on the internet talks about, oh, you need 1 or 2 inches of water on the ground that soaks in to the roots. So you have to kind of play with, and that's what we've been doing the last couple of years, playing with the amount of water that you need. But we know right off the bat you're getting rid of evaporation because the water's not spraying out, it's not bubbling onto the ground, it's going right to the roots. So the efficacy of subsurface watering in all these devices gives you at least 30 to 50% savings in your outdoor water usage. Beyond that, our device of all of these is the only one that you could really effectively deliver fertilizer. That's where I think it's really, really amazing. If you have in your job, we go to fertilize a tree and we sprinkle granulars around the root zone, and we're scratching it in the ground and trying to water it in, and so we got the ground here, the fertilizer's up here, and the roots are down in here. So we're expecting that the water is going to carry those nutrients down to the roots. It will happen, but this gets it. This supercharges it. We like to use AgriThrive liquid fertilizer, but we use granulars in here, which will sit in the bottom and release over a period of time. Both are extremely effective. The other thing that we've started doing with our composting program that Brian is going to talk to you about in a little while is that we've started filling bags with compost, and we'll stick the compost bag inside the root quencher and allow it to create kind of a compost tea right inside there, right on site. So extremely effective. You'll also see as you look around, we started originally just throwing the compost in the root quencher, but not all that material goes out the hole, so we end up having to clean it out. But in any case, so the other thing that we're doing, I probably don't even really need this microphone, but the other thing that we're doing as well is in sandy soil like Greg out in Apple Valley or in Arizona, we're doing a lot of work in Texas. We're now selling a irrigation sock, something very basic that keeps the intrusion of sandy soil into the unit. We know that generally with loamy soil, loamy sandy soil, that once this is installed and the water starts flowing out, it creates a barrier so that the soil doesn't intrude into the device. But we do have this available now to install. We felt compelled at the time to make a smaller unit. For example, for those azaleas, for the roses, we don't really have room for a full-size root quencher, nor do we need that big of a device. So we designed a smaller unit that has the same valve, the same half-inch female NPT connection, and the same holes, same directional plugs, everything, and cap. So that's for smaller bushes, shallower roots, things like that. So we do have two sizes of that device. And then I'll show these together because the spike was kind of inspired by my work with the deep drip stake. Again, very, very durable product. I think it's great, but I wanted more flexibility. So we actually designed a device that installs directly onto a drip line. So you can just push it right into the drip line and it's installed. It's tapping into the water that's flowing through that line. So I'm sure that you've seen in the past that drip grids are great and they give you a modicum of water in a large area, but a lot of plants need more water. Certain non-drought resistant plants need more water. For example, the lantana back there, these plants up here, they need more water. When you look on the hillside, you'll see a lot of the spikes installed. They just need more water. So the cap on top controls the flow of the water going into the device. And again, you get the same kind of capillary action coming out these holes, which we're going to show you in a minute, but taps right in. We have actually some installed in front on some of the bushes in front. And easy to install, no tools. We've also included with this device a 90-degree connector. So you can actually push that 90-degree connector on and hook up a 1/4-inch line to this and put it in for potted plants. You'll see that several places here in the yard. So it gives you the ultimate flexibility. So you can, just like you do now, you can just tap into your 1/4-inch line and go out to wherever you want. Same on the hillside. We've got some of these moving wherever they want. The advantage of this, again, is, with this I'm limited to whatever micro sprayer I can get that fits inside of here, very low gallons. Here I can control the flow from 1/2 gallon per hour to up to 2 gallons per hour, which that's too much, but we got a lot of flexibility on the device to be able to deliver water. From there, I think I really wanted to show you, Greg, if you could show us, I wanted to turn on this unit and show you the flow controls. I'll get my Ratio timer fired up here so we can show you how the adjustments work in the field. Okay. So, Greg, if you want to get down here and open that up, I'm just going to run this for a minute so you can see the flow controls. And I think we can see it. Yeah, you guys will be able to see it here on the TV set. Oh. You got it? Can you turn it on? There you go. And then we can just pour our fertilizer right in there, right? Awesome. So, one of the neat advantages to this is that on a hot summer day like this, I would generally tell customers, hey, you should water before the sun comes up or water, after the sun is down. But as you can see, we're delivering water under the ground. So I almost personally think that with a really hot day, we might actually want to water in the heat of the day because then we're cooling the roots down. It's definitely not going to use any more or less water doing it that way. So that's how the root quencher works. And this is kind of the market for subsurface watering and what's available. I mean, there are other. I'm sure you guys have seen the tree bags that sit on top of the ground that kind of leach water into the ground. There's a couple of devices out there like that, but this is pretty much the subsurface market, and it's not widely. One of the reasons I wanted to have this event for all of you is it's not. Kind of widely adopted in the irrigation industry. We're all used to sprinkler heads and spray heads and half-inch PVC, 3/4 inch, and all of that. And all these devices work in concert with those systems. What we've been doing out in the field now with certain customers is we've actually been going out and replacing or capping off their PVC, putting in drip lines. So a drip grid for us is, we use half-inch Netafim 0.9 gallons per hour, and we're putting them about 12 to 14 inches apart, literally in a grid in every area. So in this planting bed, we've got 2 lines in there, plus we have the root quenchers. So the root quenchers are connected to the drip line. So that's how that's working. And feel free afterwards to walk around. We've tried to expose as much of the drip line as possible so you can see kind of what we've been doing, and we're happy to turn those zones on so you can see how they're working. But again, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the property, you look at the trees, they've all been fertilized and watered with subsurface watering, which I think it's really in our future with all of our drought challenges and all the things that we have going on in the world. Our more responsible use of our natural resources makes a lot of sense. Got anything to add? You're good? Okay. So why don't we move on to Brian? And Brian, like I said, is a soil scientist and has been very much involved in helping us jumpstart our jumpstart our composting program here, but has been involved with inoculating trees, soil sampling. We've kind of gone through the whole 9 yards here to be able to share information with you today about this. So without further ado, I'm going to give you to Brian.
Thanks, Robert. I want to give a special thanks to Robert for including me on this event. We've done a lot of things here around the property, and it's been really great to work with. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me. I've been a farmer most of my life. For about 13 years now, I've worked on many different types of farms, apple orchards, diversified vegetable operations, chicken farms, and also have done landscape design. I'm a certified permaculture designer. I am also a soil scientist. I've trained with Dr. Elaine Ingham and some of the best soil scientists in the world. So by a show of hands, how many of you guys have started a compost pile in your life? A few of you, okay. And how many of you have done a soil test? Not very many. So this is really what I specialize in as a soil scientist, is being able to take a look at what's going on with our soil and come up with meaningful conclusions of what we can do to maximize our systems, get the most out of our plants, and to have abundant growth on our properties and on our farms. So people fly me all over the world and all over the United States to work on these types of projects with them, to maximize their production, to be able to get the health that they're looking for out of their plants. And this is really why Robert's brought me on to being involved with his team as well here on the property. So beyond working on farms, I've also managed and created mini compost facilities around the country as well. And I've helped to spearhead and perfect our compost systems here at Root Quencher. And we're able to take all of the different supplies and different materials that are coming off the property, the lawn that we're sitting on here, the leaves coming off of these trees, and turn this into a super microbially rich compost that can be put in the root quenchers, that can be used as a soil covering here around the property, and be able to produce something that's top tier and really the standard that should be reached for a very high quality compost is what we've been able to achieve here, which is not necessarily easy to achieve. There's some nuance to that. And what we're going to do after I finish speaking here is we're going to walk down and take a look at the compost facility we have here, and I can dig into some of the nuance behind that, some of the thinking behind the design that we have here, and answer any questions as well. So before we move on to that, does anyone have any questions for me now? All right, we're good. All right.
I do have one.
All right, we have a question down there.
Is it advisable to apply compost that is mainly composed of cow excrement to plants in general, or just to some specific kind of plant?
So what most soil consultants, they lean on a term called depends, right? So because it depends, I'm going to give some nuance to your question, right? So in general, some of the best compost that exist does include cow manure and does include steer manure. This is a core component of biodynamic compost, and there's a reason for that. Cow manure has an abundance of microbial life in it. A cow has 4 stomachs, and within their stomach they have an abundance of biology that's able to break down grass. Ruminant animals are one of the only animals that can get nutrition from grass because of that biology that's in their stomach, right? And because of that, cow manure is a really powerful catalyst to jumpstart compost. That being said, fresh manure is not necessarily the best to use. And compost, say steer manure from the hardware store, right, can be good. But a lot of the time that steer manure that we get from the hardware store uses composting methods that are really more of a waste diversion method that creates a product than a method that's geared at creating something that's microbially rich and high in nutrition, right? So those types of materials are great to work with, and they can be great to include in a composting system because they have the ability to absorb other microbiology and act as a food source for them. So cow manure in general is very good. Chicken manure is something you need to be a little more careful with. Horse manure also can be very good, but horse manure tends to have a lot of different medication in it because people feed their horses medication all the time. So that ends up in especially dewormer. And dewormer is something that can have a negative effect on the soil biology, because there's worms in the soil, and there's microscopic worms called nematodes in the soil, and those negatively affect that. Also, horse manure can have weed seeds in it, because especially Bermuda seeds and Bermuda roots, so when that's used in your garden, it can actually bring invasive weeds and also roots into your garden. Yeah. Any more questions before we move on to the compost? All right, we're good. Thank you. Down this way.
I wanted to just jump in and say that Brian and Christine at 301 Organics helped start up this composting program almost 2 years ago. And we did it because we have tons of yard waste from all the trees and bushes and grass. And we thought it was an amazing opportunity to save that material and use it. Using it in the root quencher and the way that we do with the teas and such that you'll see down at in the greenhouse was kind of a byproduct of that, and a collaboration with myself and Brian to get that going. But we think it's an amazing revenue opportunity and partnership opportunity for all of you to be able to work with your customers, not just with, we're going to go from spray heads to subsurface irrigation. Now we're going to introduce a composting program, which there are some California laws now that tell people, hey, you can't just throw your food waste away anymore. You got to do something with it. So you've got all the countertop food composters and all that kind of stuff. But Brian's going to show you what we've done here that is pretty dynamic and has kind of ignited growth and seemed like it was a great fit for all of you to be able to offer. One, for just a relationship builder with your customers, but two, for a revenue opportunity. You got to build the bin, you got to maintain the bin, whether you're maintaining the yard or not, working with the gardeners and the people that are doing yard maintenance, and then turning that into what Brian's turned it into. And you're going to see a load of, I don't know, it's about 1.5 yards of compost that we just harvested yesterday.
Yeah.
So if you want to, those of you that can, follow us down to the greenhouse. We also have it live on the TV back there, so those of you that can't come down with us can see it right back there on the TV set.
Thank you. Thanks, Robert.
You got it.
So welcome to our compost facility. I want to give a special thanks to Christine from 301 Organics. She was instrumental in helping to get this going with Robert. Special thanks to Robert for his innovative mind on a lot of the design of this system. There's a unique aspect of this system that there's airflow underneath this, and this was part of Robert's design as well. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of the way that this system works, a little bit of an overview on how really great composting works, and then we'll open up for some questions and we can take a look at some of the compost itself. So overall, the things that make a compost system work: there's an influx of material, and there's two different types of material. There is green material and there's brown material. Another way we can say that is there is nitrogen and there's carbon. Nitrogen is green, carbon is brown. And nitrogen material is like our grass clippings, it is our food scraps, manure. And manure is one that gets confusing because usually manure is brown, isn't it? And that's something that hangs people up a little bit, but that's actually a green material in our system. And so there's an influx of material, and then those materials need combined in the right ratios. And generally speaking, a good rule of thumb is a 30-to-1 ratio. And this gets a little bit complicated because this has to do with the actual makeup of the material, not the volumetric ratios. So that's something that confuses people, where leaves have a different carbon nitrogen ratio than, say, wood has, right? And this requires a level of understanding and a level of care and nuance to that. So, but generally a 30-to-1 carbon nitrogen ratio is what we're looking for. But to simplify that a little bit, we're looking at about a 3-to-1 brown to green material, right? So roughly 3 times as much brown material as there is green. And then within that, when we really begin to understand how different materials behave, we can aim for that 30-to-1 on a carbon nitrogen level, right? We understand that wood behaves differently than leaves and so on, right? And that say wood shavings are going to behave a little bit different than those materials as well, right? And that food scraps are going to behave a little different than grasses or plants from our garden. They're all going to behave a little bit differently. So when we're starting a compost, it's important to take really great notes. That's important. What was our recipe? What was that volumetric ratio? It is good to measure early on to get a sense of how materials are going to behave in a pile. And then generally, of that green material, for it to make really great compost, about 5% of that green material should be manure. That's optional. You can make vegan compost, but also really great compost, some of the top tier compost that's being created, biodynamic compost or biocomplete compost, like Dr. Aline Ingham makes, generally has some manure component. It acts as a powerful catalyst that really speeds up the piles and brings a microbially rich component beyond what the biology that's on the material itself. So leaves are covered in tons of biology. Really great compost generally is going to have some leaves in it. And then also plants are covered in biology. The biology is in the air, it's on us, it's in our bodies, it's everywhere. So we're really capitalizing on that biology. Another key component of making a good compost is including finished compost as a starter culture in those compost piles. So when you're first starting out, getting that starter culture means either going to an established composter that you know is doing a really good job and getting your hands on some, or if you're a little more technically minded and want to do some research, you can make your own inoculums, which is what I tend to do. But when you're first starting out, you can go to someone who's a really great composter and you use that as a starter culture. It's very similar to making a loaf of sourdough bread. Starts with a starter culture. And a compost pile, a lot of those same concepts apply. So this is kind of the general rules of thumb of making a really good compost pile. Another rule of thumb is a good compost pile is about 3 feet tall. It's about 3 feet around. It's generally a cubic 3 feet. And when we're starting that first compost pile, if you don't have enough material to get it 3 feet tall, I would go as far to say that you don't have a compost pile yet. You need that volume in order to get it to heat up and become compost. That's really critical. So when you're first starting out, and maybe it's only a foot tall, keep working, keep gathering material. And also getting to know your materials is really important. What materials do I have on my property? What materials do my neighbors have? What materials could I ask for? When I was first started my composting career, I guess would be a good term for it, I was going to coffee shops and I was getting coffee grounds and I was working with properties to get manure. I was working with arborists to get wood chips and leaves so that I had enough to make a proper compost. So when we do this at scale, you can make big compost piles. But generally speaking at scale, they're still about 3 feet tall and they're about 3 feet wide, but they're longer. They can be 100 feet long, 200 feet long, but they're about 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide. This is industry standard. All major compost facilities are using this, and most of the equipment to function at scale fits those dimensions as well. So 3 feet is a good metric to use. Then there's another component, water. How much water do you give, right? And a good way to think about water is the on-off switch of your compost pile. You made a compost pile and you got it 3 feet tall, or maybe it's not quite 3 feet tall yet. What turns that compost pile on and really gets it cooking is water. So if you're not ready to start that compost pile up, don't water it. It's a key point, right? But when it is time, say you got it and you layered it properly and you've got all the right ratios of green to brown and a good carbon nitrogen ratio. Another thing is diversity. diversity of material is critical to getting a really good compost pile. Different types of leaves, different types of manures, different types of green materials are all covered with unique biology that are going to make a more dynamic and diverse compost pile. Diversity, diversity, diversity. This is key. This is what's going to get you the results that you're looking for. So if we've done all of that, then we're going to go ahead and water it. And initially, on that first watering, you can't water it too much. I skipped a point also. Airflow is important. So having some wood chips in the material also allows you to have more airflow through the pile. And generally, if you don't have a nice system like this, you're going to want to put a pile of sticks on the bottom of that compost pile. You start with a pile of sticks to allow good airflow underneath. And when you have good wood chip material throughout, airflow throughout is another important piece. And when it comes time to water that compost pile, you're looking to water it significantly. It's going to be pouring out of the bottom of the compost pile. In that first watering, you cannot water too much. You can water too little. You want to get it distributed throughout the entire pile, and you want to be using really a light mist so that you are saturating all the way through and you're not blowing the material around while you're doing it with a heavy stream. And you'll do that until there's water coming out of the bottom. And if your ratios are correct with green to brown and carbon nitrogen, you're going to need to maybe water that a couple more times. You're going to need to turn it at least twice. And that process takes about 3 months to finished compost. And those next waterings are a little more critical, that you do not overwater the pile. You're going to squeeze it and you're going to see water just barely coming out of your knuckles. That's roughly about a 40 to 50% moisture in that pile is what you're looking for. And you want to be very careful in watering during those subsequent waterings. And generally, I turn piles once a month. So in that 3-month process, you only need to turn the pile 2 times if you're doing it right and you have the right ratios. And the next piece is, okay, I have this compost, what do I need to do with it, right? If it's in a bin, if you want to keep making compost, you need to get it out. So sifting compost, that's optional. People don't always sift compost, but when you do, it adds a lot to your system because all of those siftings that you're pulling out are covered in biology and act as a really powerful catalyst to throw into your next piles. And when you have a piece of every pile and every subsequent pile and new material coming in, there's a compounding effect. The compost actually gets better and better and better as you progress. That's really what we're aiming at. And by doing sifting, that's one piece that can help facilitate that and streamline it. Also, it gives you a really nice material that's going to go into solution better when we make a compost tea or a compost extract. So now that I've given this overview of composting, we can talk about the system a little bit. So this is a unique system. This is a 4-bay system. It has boards that pull out that allow us to harvest these piles and turn them. On the bottom, we do use sticks still in these systems, but there's an airflow system that actually pushes air through 4-inch pipe on the bottom of this system, which really helps to speed this up a little bit. And really with this system, we could be harvesting in a little less than 3 months. But we push to that 3-month mark because what that allows to happen is within this pile there is the microbiology, but there's also macrofauna. There's earthworms, there's isopods, and all of them are shredding and chewing up that woody material and creating a really beautiful texture that helps to finish the compost. And so that 3-month mark in this system really gets us to a super premium top tier compost. And we are filling this up until this is roughly a 3x3 cube, right? And so we're filling it up and we're turning twice, just like I was saying, and we are watering about twice. One of the ways that we're watering here is we're using water from the pond, which is, again, diversity. We're adding now aquatic biology into this system that's contributing to that compounding effect of adding diverse biology. So generally, we have all of our materials are stored outside, and they're behind a gated area just outside this greenhouse here. The day we're harvesting a pile, we're also building one. That allows us to maximize efficiency in this system. If you do not build a pile the same day you harvest it, you're creating a gap in that system where material is going to start piling up. So it's critical to build the pile the same day that you harvest it so that we're maximizing the efficiency of this system. And those are some of the key points about this. Also, having a lid on here is pretty critical because rats and stuff will get into these systems. Most of what we're doing here at this facility involves leaves, grass clippings. We are involving some high quality manures. But food scraps are something that we are including from Robert's home, but they're a very small percentage of what's going into these systems. Most of it is yard waste. And we're using chippings from here, lawn clippings, plant material, things from the garden are mainly what are going in here. And it's a core understanding that most of the compost facilities around the world that are creating top tier compost actually don't use food scraps at all. But that doesn't mean that food scraps can't contribute to a great compost. They can. They need to be used mindfully. But there's a reason that big compost facilities don't generally use food scraps. They don't use food scraps because they're unpredictable. You don't always know what you're going to have, and that can make the pile behave a little unpredictable as well. So having somewhat of a set recipe and set ratios that you have are also a core tenet of maximizing efficiency in these systems and ending up with a consistent end result that's going to be somewhat consistent and homogeneous. So another key point is every single compost pile is different. Even if you use the same materials, quote unquote, they are different materials. They're not the same leaves they used before, even though they're from the same tree. They have different biology on them. They've maybe sat around a little longer. Wood chips are not created equal. Food scraps are not always the same. Manure is not always going to be the same. So the pile can behave a little bit differently. But the closer we can get those ratios, and when we use consistent materials, they are somewhat predictable. But we always run the chance of a pile getting away from us and being able to readjust. And this is where really the human element comes into play. The nuance involved with doing a compost pile can make us stronger. It actually makes us more resilient humans and deepens our understanding of the way that our natural world works. Energy is never diminished or increased. It only is transformed into something else, right? And the compost pile is a really beautiful microcosm of where that's happening in a place where we can witness that happening fairly quickly. 3 months is a fairly quick turnaround to see a metamorphosis of energy and to see it turn into something that's actually a really powerful catalyst and nutrient that can grow food for us, improve our land, and take a waste source and turn it into something that's very powerful and very valuable. And that is something that's very unique and powerful about compost, and something that I want to drive in that we really understand about what these systems can do. So here is some of the compost. You can pass this around. So compost, really great compost, generally is dark in color. And that dark color is humic content. That humic content is a core part of what we're looking for. But also, it needs to be microbially rich. And this is the big difference between what a big facility does and what we can do here on a small scale. Generally, big facilities are focused on waste diversion. They're focused on taking free sources of waste and turning it into something that maybe they could sell for $30, $40 a yard, right? That's not what we're doing here. We are very focused on microbially rich compost. Microbially rich compost goes anywhere from $500 to $700 a yard. Significant jump, because the stuff that you're buying from the hardware store, that you're getting from a big waste diversion facility, may be black in color, it may have decent texture to it, but it's microbially poor. It does not have the right microbiology. It generally is very high in bacteria, and it's very low in nematodes, protozoa, as well as fungal spores and fungal hyphae. And those are the things that are critical to nutrient cycling. And that's really what we're aiming at when we're producing this compost, is to facilitate nutrient cycling that improves soil systems and creates abundant plant growth. And that's why people are willing to pay $700 a yard for this types of compost. And this is what we're producing here. So I wanted to pass it around so that everyone can see that and become clear of what that type of compost looks like and smells like and feels like. It has a very unique texture, it has a unique smell, and it has a unique look to it. It looks different than stuff that we're going to get from a big facility. And there's a big reason for that. There's a lot of care that goes into this. And I know that this is microbially rich because we've been testing this the entire time. All of this is actively being put under the microscope to confirm that our methodologies are working. So how do we take a small amount of, relatively small amount of compost like this and scale this up to the big property? We don't necessarily have enough where we can be spreading this compost everywhere. But what we can do is we can turn this into a liquid. And that's what this here is for. This is a compost brewer. We can use this to make compost tea or compost extract. Compost tea, a core differentiator, includes a food source. It generally is going to include some sugar, maybe fish hydrosylate, maybe some added humic acids are included in making a compost tea, and they're aerated. Where a compost extract is, the simplest way to describe it is literally putting compost in water and agitating it and making a tea. So what's great about this system, this is a vortexing system. So this mixes it and also mixes the water so that the water is becoming a little more tightly woven. Water molecules through vortexing can get smaller, and those smaller molecules become structured. That structure, water can penetrate cells in the plants much easier. So it's a reason that we've created this type of system. Another thing that's unique about this system is we're able to pull out of here with a fertilizer injector and push this compost extract or compost tea directly into the root quenchers and into the drip lines all over this property. So this allows us, this is also an efficiency thing. We can take our compost here right in this greenhouse, scale it up and distribute it amongst the entire property very efficiently. And that's a core part of why we've created this. So those are some of the core tenets of composting, some of the core aspects of this system. A thing that I left out, which becomes a little complicated as well, is temperatures, right? These piles need to heat up, and that's a core part of why we need to get that carbon-nitrogen ratio correct. That is what produces heat in the pile. That 30-to-1 carbon-nitrogen ratio, or roughly a 3-to-1 green-to-brown ratio, is going to produce heat. And we want that pile to get up to over 120 degrees. And by doing that, there is a sterilization that's happening, especially to food scraps. It's something that we want that to heat up and actually cook that pile. And that's going to produce humic acids and also diminish any pathogens that may end up in this compost. So that allows us to have a high level of trust and care in what we're doing here, and trust that we can distribute this stuff amongst the property and that it's going to get the kind of plant growth that we want. So usually we want these piles to heat up to at least over 120 twice in our cycle. 2 to 3 times is great. That knows that we're going to sterilize it, but we don't want it to stay there, because over 120 is where we're going to start producing actinobacteria. We're also going to diminish the growth of nematodes, protozoa, and fungal hyphae. That stuff doesn't grow over 120 degrees. So we want it to spike to sterilize it during that thermophilic stage. But we want it to come back down to roughly 90, 100 degrees. Is a really great place where fungal hyphae are going to grow. That's where the nematodes and the protozoa are going to begin to propagate and thrive. Nematodes are another key point when we're talking about microbially rich compost. Nematodes are an apex predator. They're one of the biggest pieces of microbiology that's in these piles. And because of that, they're one of the last guys to show up. They're not going to show up if they don't have anything to eat. They eat the fungi. They eat the protozoa. They eat also the bacteria in these piles. So we need to get all of the other guys in play. Also, yeast tend to show up before fungi. They're a precursor to fungi. So we use inoculums to facilitate that. We use inoculums that have lactobacillus in them. That lactobacillus allows us to jumpstart that yeast production to facilitate streamlined production of fungi. And it's an efficiency thing. And also helps to sterilize and diminish any smell. You'll notice it doesn't stink in here. And the compost smells good, right? It should smell earthy.
Didn't you just build the first?
Yeah, we just built a pile a couple days ago. There's no smell of that pile happening in here. And a big part of that is that we're including our finished compost in our piles that's abundant with biology, but also we're using lactobacillus inoculum in our piles as well. And this is an efficiency thing, a smell thing, and also a diversity thing. We're adding in more diversity. Lactobacillus also triggers quorum sensing. Quorum sensing is a big part of what makes these systems work as well. And one way we can describe that is on a sports team. Generally, on a sports team, there is someone on a team that empowers everyone else to become better on the team. That's your Kobe Bryant or your different people on these teams that actually make everyone match them and make them better and stronger. And in a biological system, Lactobacillus is really good at that. It can show up and get everyone on their A game and get the party cooking in that pile. And another way you could describe that is like a party, right? There's usually someone that's at a party that the party is not quite doing what it should until a particular person gets there, right? And that is how it's working in these biological systems as well, and quorum sensing is part of that, right? And so I've dug into some of the science, I've dug into some of the methodology involved with this, some of the nuance, some of the ways that this can actually make us stronger humans and better farmers, right? A quote that I really like that's been a guiding quote in my life is from a book called The One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka. And the quote is, "The ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but it's the cultivation and perfection of human beings." This quote really says a lot. It says that the act of doing these types of practices can actually make us stronger humans that can show up better in life, be leaders, and help other people and help our planet, right? And it has a deep connection to that these systems are not actually separate of us. All the things that are happening in this pile are also happening in our stomach, they're happening in our bodies, and they're things that we interact with and we influence. And these types of systems are beautiful teachers, and that's why I really encourage when we're starting piles to take really great notes. Take notes of how you did it. Take notes of what you're observing and what you're learning from this about yourself and about nature. So now we can open up for questions.
Well, and I was going to add to that is that I don't know about all of you, but my brain kind of blows out the back of my head when I listen to some of the things Brian talks about. But the good news is he, as he has been with us, you know, he's here because he's a consultant and can help at any different level. You know, we built these bins, and he's come in and been very, very involved the last few months, and we've seen a huge success in our program. But he's also available to advise and consult with you, with your customers. So I think that's a huge value, and I totally agree, Brian, that, you know, what I've learned in the last, I guess, half a dozen years now in being more intimate with this property in general, but with the soils, with accessing the roots through the root quencher, with composting, all the things that we're doing together, it's brought me closer to the land, closer to family. I mean, I always say that the root quenchers are all about developing a closer relationship with your plants and trees, but this is all part of the same program. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, questions definitely if you have any questions.
Thanks for plugging. I do run a business. I do this for a living. I do help people all over the world with this. We've built compost facilities in Africa. I've built them all over the country. I've done it at scale all the way down to small scale like this. So I know how to do it with equipment, with tractors, with compost turners. This stuff's by hand. This is actually my favorite way to do it. It's more intimate and you get a much higher quality. But I'd like to open up for any questions anyone might have. I notice you're taking some notes. Anything you need in your notes, we can get them in there.
I'm writing down as we go because I'm not a professional. I haven't made that many compost piles. Yeah. But I love earth. I love the soil. I love plants. I love the green, the leaves, the oxygen. I'm very connected with our planet, you know, and I agree with what you just said that it makes us
learn from us, you know, like how we can become better and see ultimately like you know, in a way how we end up, you know, like because we're like we have to be considerate with the people around us and treat them like we would want other people to treat us, because ultimately at the end of the day when we die we become compost itself and we feed other life out there. And yeah, so I mean,
this is the deeper you get with nature and the more you get involved with these systems, it's inevitable to come to the conclusions that none of this is something that is separate of us. We're actually very much part of these types of systems and we're intimately connected to them. And this is really one of the core issues globally, is a misunderstanding of this concept. Because when we look at the things that happen with our environment, and we look at the type of things that happen on industrial farms, it actually can facilitate some compassion, right? Where we realize, wow, this person or this business, they don't understand this. And if they did, they would act a lot differently. You wouldn't put poison on your ground, because if you realize how connected you are to that, it's quite literally putting poison in your mouth and in your children's mouths. And that's an understanding that is very challenging to relay without people experiencing it for themselves, right? And to paraphrase a quote like from Buckminster Fuller, he talks about that we really don't have the ability to influence people's thinking. But you can provide someone with a tool, and through the use of that tool, their thinking can change, right? And that really is in relay with the quote I gave from Masanobu Fukuoka. Through the act of doing something and experiencing it yourself, through working with a compost as a tool, or working with the land, you can begin to come to those conclusions yourself and share those things with others. And it's been really a core part of my mission in life, is to, I know that I can't make people think the way that I think, but I can show them things through experiencing it themselves, and I can give them tools in their toolkit through using them, that they could find these things themselves, and a lot of the time they do find it, and then they begin sharing it with other people, and it creates a ripple effect. They act as the tool itself through composting or through working with plants is a catalyst to make stronger humans that interact with our planet in a better way. And it's a big part of my mission in life is to do that. Do we have any questions, deeper questions about composting, about materials, about these types of systems? A really simple way you can make a compost system like this is using pallets, right? That's very common. You'll see systems with pallets all the time. And pallets are something great. It's something you can get for free. That you could make this type of system to encapsulate your compost. You don't necessarily need a lid on a compost. It does help. It traps in some of the moisture and eliminates pests from getting in there. And if you're dealing with food scraps in particular, pests become a problem. Particularly roaches and rats are two of the big ones that come with use of food scraps, and yeah, and they like the warmth. So, but really great compost systems, when you're first starting one out, you don't need any of that, and really doing it on the bare ground has a lot of merit to it, because that bare ground has biology in it. It contributes to that diversity of system. And the best compost is the compost that you make yourself on your own property. And there's several reasons for that. Not only is it making you stronger in all the things we've been discussing, but you're actually adapting the biology to your property. It's adapting to your temperature, your barometric pressure, the biology of the existing soil, and is getting to know your soil even better. So one way to think about it is when you include some of your soil from your property into your pile, which is encouraged, when that biology is getting to know that soil, and when you then introduce that into your bare soil, it already knows your soil a little bit. They got to know one another and synced up, and it's going to speed up the process of that compost being able to do its work. So getting some of your finished soil from your land into these piles is encouraged and is a good idea as well. So that's it for now. Thank you. We're going to move on and move on to Nick's segment.
For our next act,
I'm an act, huh?
Mr. Nick Federoff, horticulturist, TV personality, all-around good guy, and friend of mine. Nick.
Okay, now for the record, I was announced as the nation's first OHOG. You know, like you have doctors, right? Lawyer, and they always have these acronyms behind there. So can anybody figure out what OHOAG stands? Nick Federoff, OHOAG? Ornamental horticulture, right? No, it means one heck of a nice guy. Okay, thank you for coming out. This is really important because if anybody has ever followed me on either my syndicated radio show, which is heard on stations throughout the country, here locally, I'm on KLCS television, which is PBS station, every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. I also am the resident garden expert for CBS KCAL 9 News every Saturday at 8 o'clock. Anyway, I have hundreds and hundreds of shows that we've done on both stations that I work on, and I'm a garden communicator. But prior to me being a garden communicator, I do have a degree in ornamental horticulture, which also helped me to get my license as a qualified applicator with the state of California, which I don't hold any longer, but I decided to get it because it was really important for people to know that I know that aspect of it. Because if you're going to be a bit of a tree hugger, you need to have the schooling and not only just the feeling of what is right and what is wrong. So I've got the science behind that, because some things that we do, we have to do with certain type of chemicals. In other words, what I like to do is the IPM approach, integrated pest management. Do whatever you can as naturally and as organically as possible, and only and if only when you bring in the nuclear warfare, and hopefully by then everything that you've done naturally and organically has actually worked. Okay. Fascinating information that you received today here. It's so exciting because if you've seen any of my TV work, you know that, and heard me on the radio, you've known that I've done something, and I have my little cliche that I use all the time. And this particular cliche, I'm kind of hoping is going to end up being something that I can get at least a nickel on every time everybody says it. You see, it's not about not using water. It's about strategically placing it. How are we going to strategically place our water to our plants and have it become successful? Doing whatever we're doing. So how are we going to get those plants to do what we want them to do? Because believe it or not, just like most of our relationships in life, we can manipulate plants. So if you're being manipulated in your relationship, you can manipulate these plants. Let me give you a good example here. Who ever heard of growing blueberries in Southern California? It's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to grow blueberries, I'm telling you, because they're a colder weather plant. But through plant manipulation, a lot of people like to call it GMO, That's very controversial. I believe it's called GE. Anyway, let's get on to the subject over here. Through hybridization, we've been able to take plants and we've been able to naturalize them for our yard and gardens. That's what's really cool about it. Whether it be for ornamental plants, or what, these are really good, or or whether they're for edible plants as well. So if you're going to be gnawing on this kind of stuff, you want to grow this kind of stuff, we can grow it. Now, we live in a concrete forest. This beautiful place that we're at today, this isn't normal for people. We don't have this kind of stuff. Our concrete forest has that exactly around it. It's got concrete everywhere. How do we grow these plants? Well, I'm a contender and believing in a couple different things. Number one, I want you, if you've ever heard of has anybody heard of the USDA zonal chart? You know, like that? All right, throw it out the window. It's worthless. Means absolutely nothing in Southern California. Why? Because we can grow anything anywhere as long as we behave ourselves. And what I mean by that is that from where we're at right now, hour and a half away, when there's snow, we could be skiing. Hour and a half away in the other direction, if I'm pointing in the right direction, we could be in the ocean surfing. No place in the world can you do that but here in Southern California. Isn't that phenomenal? So therefore, if we know what our microenvironment is, we can grow things in complete shade in a greenhouse downstairs and create compost at the same time. It is the most fascinating thing that we have going for us over here. So with that, I was asked to share some information that I have about how to grow plants in tight spots. Because whether you have one small house plant or acres of land, you can garden. And gardening, of course, dates back all the way to the aspect of farming. In fact, that's what I kind of dig what Brian does over here, because he's an actual farmer. So when you're talking to farmers, all we're doing is that we're taking their information and we're bringing it down to understand the level for us. They're working on, 500,000 acres, could be 1 acre. But the point is that whatever a farmer does, we need to do as well. Now, we've seen how farmers have been using irrigation, and they've been forced, there's rules and laws and regulations that have forced them to make sure that their irrigation is in place and to properly save it. Well, I think I said use what I've been talking about. It's not about not using water, it's about strategically placing it. 5 cents from everybody, please. Not about not using water, is strategically placing it. We could use water. There's water to be had. We just have to be intelligent about it. We have to place it where it belongs. Concrete doesn't grow. I don't know if you knew that or not. Doesn't grow. Plants do. So you get a little moisture on there, other than crying or spitting on it, we have to supplement that somehow. And getting it down below the root surface is so important. All right, so what we're going to do, for those of you who are able enough to do this, we are going to go for a walk. And we're going to point out some of the plants. Actually, we're going to point out all the plants except for one that is on this property. And I want to show you how we can grow things in tight spots in very unusual areas, and at the same time reap the benefits of what those plants can do. So everybody saddle up, put your walking shoes on. We're going to be heading over in this way. Try not to trip over that cart that Tyler put in the way. And I think we're going to be good. Okay, so come on, let's go. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
It's not my cart. No, it's Greg's cart. Thanks, Greg. Don't worry,
I have to blame somebody.
It's Greg. Proximity guilt.
All right, let's try not to throw the camera guy in the pool. Got a couple people? All right.
gotta go here, so I'm kind of out of the way.
Okay, that's fine. All right, come on down, you guys. All right, so the first thing that we're coming up across, which is pretty interesting, for those of you who like table grapes and or wine, you know, viticulture, it's a thing. This right here is a really great example of growing in a tight area and being able to actually see the benefits of it all. So what I'm really going to do is I don't know if Robert, did you bring the fan? I don't see you're supposed to bring a fan and a chair so you can sit here so I can eat grapes. Okay? Okay. Now grapes have, yeah, there you go. So grapes have been around for a long time, more than 6,000 years. They're Mediterranean plants. They grow in a lot of different places of the world, but they were brought into the United States in the early 1800s. But it wasn't until the late 1800s when William Thompson, who created the famous Thompson table grapes, he was the guy who took a grape from, he had it imported to New York, went to New York, brought that grape out, and he only bought 3 plants. Only one of those 3 plants actually took hold, and that's why we have Thompson Seedley grapes, which makes raisins. And what's really interesting about what we're going to see here, we've got a lot of coverage in this area, and we do have some grapes that are and feel free to take a couple as you hear and go. If you eat all of them, I'm going to have to hurt you because I want to eat some too. But you're going to see some of them are turning into raisins. And how interesting is that? I'm standing in the shade right now. How can they be turning into raisins? Well, this is part of the whole idea when you're growing plants in a tight area. We're using the ambient heat that whatever filters through here hits this block wall, and that's going to help it grow. Now, a grape grows on a fashion of trellising that we're going to kind of talk about a little bit later on. That trellising is called the cordon method, where you grow things on a lateral level like this. So the main thing that we have to remember is that whenever we're doing any kind of this lateral growing, you really need to be on top of the pruning, because the last thing you want to do is to get a concussion from walking underneath something like this. But you also want to be able to harvest whatever it is that's coming down. So these are young plants. How old are these plants?
This is their 3rd year.
See, 3rd year. You can tell that they're young just based on how thick this stalk is on the plant over here. And it's doing, and if you look at it, literally, it's only growing in a small area like this. Now, why can't he grow it in a small area like this? Because it has a taproot. This taproot is going to go down. It's not going to be picking anything up. That's why when we're doing a subsurface irrigation, it's important to get those nutrients as far down as possible, so that capillary action, which kind of is it's a sucking machine, it's like a sponge, and it's going to just pull itself out like this to get inside there. This we'll never have any problems with any of the breaking up of the concrete, because we're forcing the growth downwards. Plant manipulation, that's what I was talking about over there. That's what we're doing over here too. So kind of take a look at this, and let's walk a little bit and feast on some of these things as you're coming down. Don't hurt the camera dude, because he's always got to get my good side over here. All right? So come on down. This is really nice. So notice how you have the wire, it's attached. He had decided to put these poles up. Now they do have those. You ever see those? Hey buddy, how you doing? Hi. Hi. So they always have those concrete tabs that you could put on there, and you could also, that's one way of doing it as well. But here, because he's trellising it up, not being pretentious, just using EMT, this is just good old-fashioned conduit right here, to lift everything up. So this is really kind of a cool thing. You know, why don't the rest of you guys just do the tour on yourself? I'm going to come over here and just harvest and eat these things, okay? Because they're so good.
They are.
Get the ones that look like raisins too, because they actually taste like raisins. That is nice. Okay, let's come on over here and see what we got. See, Thompson.
Oh, yeah, no.
first place is because they are coming up for to the go downward more by doing root pruning. There's a damage. You know, I don't remember. Most of our plants, I mean, they come from all over the world. We have more success with, like for instance, if you're doing water saving plants, there's plants from Africa, China, Japan, Israel. There's plants from all over the world that do better as a water saving plant than our California natives. The problem with the California natives is that most of them go dormant during the summertime.
Exactly.
Who wants them to go dormant? And the reason why they can go dormant is because there's no moisture inside of it. Instead, there is oil inside of it.
Right.
That oil is what causes the fires that we have.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, if you want to be warm and fuzzy and have one little plant, that's okay. But you could do a lot better and have why not have a flowering bush instead of something that's like that?
Yeah. Do they have a cultivar for this lily, or is it just
No,
to keep them
it's either
less,
it's either one or the other with
yeah,
them.
yeah.
All right. Yeah. Let's have you guys stand over here a little bit. I'm going to use some of the... Come on. Unless you want to stand there. You want to hold this? You can hold this for me.
I can hold this.
All right.
Do something.
Okay. All right, so kind of look in this direction over here. We're going to be standing here for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to go over there. So over there is shadier. One thing you have to remember all to keep with you are the right kind of tools in the yard and garden. Do it. It's just that simple. Just do it. Okay? Wear a hat. Do what you got to do. If you want to be stylish, wear glasses. They thought I was too stylish to wear my shades today, but you know, we'll work with it. All right, so what are the kind of tools that you want? So the whole idea here for me is to create a flow of income and understanding what our plants can do. So it's a two-way thing over here. Specialty plantings and gardenings are really interesting because you can turn that into a viable business. So, I mean, you have people who like to just mow lawns, you have people who like to mow lawns and trim bushes, and then you have specialty things where, like, for instance, if you want to plant a garden, this is really popular in Santa Monica, as a matter of fact, where there are contractors that will just plant and they maintain your vegetable garden for you. You get a portion of it, and then they take a portion of it. You got to pay them a couple of bucks, but it's worth it if you don't like pulling weeds in your garden. So this is another aspect where you could turn this into a viable business. So what we always have to do, we have to remember the concept. You dig $100 hole for a $10 plant. Now, thankfully, a root quencher isn't going to cost you $100. It's gonna cost you whatever it is, and then it's able to put it. You put it next to the plant. Now, if you notice, this is really important right here. You see this root quencher right here is not sucked up against the plant itself. So what you want to do is you want to move it out a little bit, and the reason why we want to do that is because this is going to grow. It's going to expand like this. But at the same time, we're also going to be cutting it back, and we're going to be training it. And in a couple of minutes over here, I'm going to show you some citrus trees that have no business growing where they're growing. But through plant manipulation and espaliering and seeing the foresight of what a plant can do, it's amazing. So we can actually, this is real life stuff. You're not going to be able to get around. So what are the tools that we're going to need? Well, there's a bunch of tools you're going to need. I love working with loppers, different types of loppers. I would rather have a bypass lopper as opposed to an anvil lopper. Now this is an anvil lopper, and if you look real close here, you'll see how there's a blade, and then it falls onto a level playing field. But there's room behind each one of these. There's a spacer here. This pair is an ergonomic pair. It's a power one because it has these gears on here, so limited hand space. I normally don't use them. Use the super long ones. There is a company that does make these to where you twist the handle and you can make them longer or shorter. That always helps very well. Otherwise, what we're doing is that we're using a bypass. So a bypass is kind of like a pair of scissors where they bypass. Now you notice my arm is very far away from a bypass one because we don't want any mistakes. Okay, keep it far away as possible from you. And I do really hope that you wear eye protection whenever you're doing any kind of pruning. It's so important. I was filming a TV show. Actually, I was pruning a sago palm, and one of the fronds came and it nailed me in the eye, and my eye didn't straighten up for over 6 weeks. Oh, it was bad. It was bad. But anyway, so using a bypass pair, and the reason why we use a bypass pair is because you can actually get closer to the branch, and whenever you make your cuts, see if you look over here, right here, these cuts have been made really close. That's what we want. We don't want to have any nubs on there. Sometimes you got to have the nubs. It's just the way that it goes. So we have the nubs. So let's see. Let me look at the tools again real quick. Now this, you got to give people kudos for trying. Okay. So this is probably hands down one of the most unusual pruners I have ever seen in my life. I looked them up. I've had this for years. Needless to say, they're not in business anymore. but it was really, the concept was really good. What you got was a sleeve that came over your arm, and just the front was out. And, yeah, and the idea behind it. So let's see if we can get camera dude to do this. I'm gonna come down right here. I'm gonna prune this right here. The idea is that you were to take this and you prune it, and as you prune your flower, it sticks with you. So there are commercially made products that will do stuff like this, but and then what you do is to sharpen it, there's a circle thing right here. You just twist it. But yeah, very interesting kind of concept. All right, these tools are going to cost you money, by the way. They're expensive. Here's another bypass one. This one, if you could hear the click, okay, that is called a ratchet pruner. A ratchet pruner is for people with limited hand strength. So if you have limited hand strength, you can do this kind of pruning. And of course, you got to remember, right tool for the right job. You are not going to be pruning much more than, you know, ½ inch on a branch like this. But we all know, because every one of you are guilty of it, where you go and you get a branch that's too big and you're like this, and how many of you take it and you grain it and you start going, and you know, especially I put a pair of loppers, right? And you're twisting like this and you're trying to get it.
Every weekend.
Yeah, every weekend. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Now, not a bad idea to have on hand a couple of saws, some kind of saw. There's a lot of saws. Typically, saws, they cut on the pool. Some manufacturers, they will sharpen them so you can go on the front. The reason why you have the saw on the pool, the cutting on the pool, is because you're usually working on the ground. If you're working in a tree in a ladder, and you're like this, and you're pushing like a carpenter saw can do, you can hurt yourself, fall down, go boom, because pruning trees is the #1 blue-collar job that kills the most amount of people. So that's why we got to be careful. So you have a saw like that. Here's another saw that you know, takes, and it'll clip in here, and just, you know, they're just nice. I like these little saws because they're really good. Little snippy pruners. These are bypass pruners. You could do that. Maybe nose hairs or something as well. And then, and that's important for doing this kind of work. And the reason why it's important is because what we're kind of doing here is we're doing bonsai without the zai. That makes no sense, does it? All right, and it's a fascinating story about that. You know, bonsai cutting started, and you know, a lot of this stuff we hear it's 6,000 years ago. That's because people didn't know how to write before then. So they started doing it, and it was the Japanese who came up with the word bonsai, but it was the Chinese who actually culture that actually started to perfect it. And then the Japanese, hey, wait, that's not a bad idea, and they've already had the wheels in motion, and here we are today. So you think about it. That's kind of what we're doing with these plants. We're creating bonsai out of them. Now, some people say bonsai. I say bonsai because I don't know any different. So we're taking the plants and we're sucking them against this cordon style of pruning over here. We're tying them down, and then when you look really close, we're not tying them down with anything fancy. These are just, you know, when you go, they're the little bread ties. That's all they are. Okay, so we use these for manipulating and getting in. These are technically floral shears. So if we wanted to hack away at that gardenia plant again, you know, this is actually a lot better than using something like this, because it's kind of too big. And you can get in there and you can cut more than what you want. So we have to do that. Okay, so this right here is an actual pair of bonsai pruners. This is what a hardcore bonsai grower would use, because it has a little point on it. It's very, in fact, you know, why don't you guys pass that around? Look at it. All right. Now, we're going to see some fruit trees over here, and what they're doing with the fruit trees, as I mentioned, is almost impossible to do, but it's so cool because we actually could do it if you tried. Now, this right here is a tool that is used for picking. This is a picking tool specifically for citrus. Now, you ever notice when you pick citrus, buy citrus from the store, it has the little nub that's still attached? That actually helps preserve it for a longer period of time. Because if you end up just taking and pulling it off, you can pull a little bit of the rind off and it starts to spoil right away. But this right here keeps it further away and you're able to do that. So that's also kind of a fun thing too. So what we're doing over here, guys, is this. Once you see, you have to remember, and this is why you want to come back and you want to do this kind of stuff as quickly, well, not quickly, you want to have a regimented program on this. You just don't want to check it out and then 6 months later look at it again and 6 months later, right? Because there's rules to follow. Okay. Now, one of the rules to follow are the type of plants that you put in. And remember earlier I mentioned about the microclimates. Okay, the reason we talk about the microclimate is because the variety of plant that you have is going to determine whether or not you're really going to be able to grow something successfully. We already know in Southern California, citrus will grow, period. Any kind of citrus, anywhere will grow. So the ones that we have to worry about are the plants that well, not that one, the ones that go deciduous, because they need something called chill hours. Chill hours are at every tree. This is what's so cool about this. Every tree has an internal computer inside of it, and this computer is collecting the amount of chill hours that it needs to produce for the following year. Okay, so at the very minimum, and in fact we mentioned, I believe it was either Iran or Israel. They are developing right now an apple. We got an apple tree over here that's got apples on it. They're developing an apple that only needs 300 chill hours. That seems like a lot, but it's not, right? Because most of our fruit trees, they need between 500 to 600 at the very minimum to do that. Okay, so if you wanted to grow an apple, really be successful at it, grow a Gordon apple. And the reason why you grow a Gordon apple is because a Gordon apple is nothing more than a red, delicious apple that is grown on a walnut rootstock. Now, wait a minute. How are you going to do that? Yeah. How are you going to do that, right? So you got two different plants. They look like they're two different species, but in the family, in the family over here, they are actually related way back here. If you go one step higher, then you're not going to be able to make it. So in this plant kingdom, you have to put and you have to graft deciduous plants with deciduous plants. You can't take a citrus and put a deciduous on there and vice versa. You can put several varieties of citrus on one plant, and you can put several different varieties. They call those cocktail plants. Now these cocktail plants, you have to be careful with those. And the reason you have to be careful is because you never know what is going to be the most dominant of it. That's usually what ends up happening. The most dominant of that will take over the plant. So if you're going to end up doing any of this, you have to be cognizant of the varieties that are coming in. So let's just take this pear here for a second. All right, if you want to grow this pear and you want it to have the chill hours, then what you're going to do is you could regulate it by putting ice at the bottom of the plant. And you do this in the wintertime. And it will, when it's dormant, and it'll think that it's actually colder than it is. So I've helped plants. In fact, I know a guy that's in Baldwin Park. I helped him put in a Colorado blue spruce, and there's no way you're going to be able to grow that plant. I told him about the ice trick. He went out and bought an ice machine. Today, this tree has acclimated itself, but the first 3-4 years, he was out there dumping ice on it, even in the winter, even in the summertime. That cooled it down to enough to trick the tree into thinking it was going to do. Expensive? Oh yeah, that's expensive to do. But if you're passionate about it and you want to do something and your plants aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can actually do that. So oddly enough, you got ice, throw it down your root quencher, you're already down by the root system, you're going to be watering it, and you're going to be able to cool them down. So it's not freezing it. You only want temperatures that are between, say, 34, 35 degrees to no more than 45 degrees. That's the chill, and they will collect that.
Because it's soil temperature, not ambient.
It's more soil temperature than it is ambient temperature. Absolutely. So anyway, as we're doing this and as we're growing, we're taking and we're we're training the plant, we're pulling it. You want to do it when the plant and the branches are pliable so that you don't break them. Okay, now you're going to break some sometimes. It's not the end of the world. It's a plant to grow back. It's okay. You don't want to kill all of them, right? So you have like this, and then this one here is getting pretty close to it. So we put another clip right here. You know what you could also use? It looks really janky. Use a clothespin. A clothespin will work, and sometimes that'll work. It just looks horrible. These little things here, because you can hide them and they look good. There's a little wire, you know. But if you use a clothespin, another thing that'll happen is that the branch will grow with the clothespin, and it'll open up and it won't strangle it. So there's different things, you know. But then again, if you're over here anyhow and you're looking at it and you go, oh, look at that, it's choking, then you just loosen it up a little bit. That's how you got to do it. All right, let's come over here and take a look at a couple of things that don't make sense at all. Okay, so here's something that you got to be careful with. This right here, down in this area, is lucky that it is growing. I would have considered this a sucker when it started to grow. Even at this point, I would think of getting rid of it, because it's every one of these plants, in order for to grow properly, has to be grafted. If you don't have a graft, it's technically not going to grow good. So here is something that is out of the normal. If you look at this branch up here, you're going to see fruit on it. And I believe you see fruit on it because this right here is the graft, right here, from here down. So I think it started above the graft when it first started coming out. And then right now, it's making its way toward the graft. So it's actually being grafted itself. It's actually naturally grafting itself onto the plant. But typically, we would cut that off. When you plant, you never plant below the graft. If you plant it up here, it doesn't mean that the plant's not going to grow. It just means you're going to get a lot of suckers. And then you right there are a sucker. Yes, sir.
What happens if we cut it now at this stage?
Okay, if you cut it right now, nothing's going to happen. Yeah, what it would do, it would probably open up the canopy a little better. But I would take it, and I would take that saw that we're talking about, and I would cut it as close as you can to this. Now, typically, if we're talking about we'll call regular pruning over here, here's a really good example. Here we have a branch. Let's say we wanted to remove this branch right here. It's dangerous to take your saw and to prune it all the way back to this, past this right here. It's called the collar. Can you see this little bump right here? So if you cut into the collar will not grow over and heal itself. That's when you're going to have to use mastic on it. So if you have a healthy tree, and you don't cut into the collar, it will heal itself. Now, right here, and I don't know if camera people can catch this or not, but right here is a absolutely perfect cut. They trimmed it off. Like, this is a sucker, and is Robert looking? Oh, I'm taking it off. Okay, so right here, it was coming out, and you could see how it's actually growing over the collar. So if you want to take a look at that, that's a perfect example of what we want. Come check this out right here. You see how this is starting to grow over? And at this point, you never need to put mastic. If you were to put mastic on this cut, it wouldn't heal. Okay, because you're just enabling it by putting a battery to it. A Band-Aid on it. Put a Band-Aid on it.
I like the battery too.
Yeah, batteries are cool. Okay, so these right here, you're going to look at some of the labels on these plants. Some of these labels will show you that they're either dwarf, semi-dwarf, or if they don't tell you that they're anything, they are actually full-grown standard plants. So, without poking your eyeballs out, turn around. These are all full-grown citrus. These citrus have been here for probably 50, 60 years, and they've been able to espalier them really tight against the wall. And it's hard when you have a plant that's this old. You got to really be careful, because you're talking about old wood growth over here. That could be a huge problem if you cut off too much of it. But it's all a matter of getting in there, opening the canopy up, allowing the sun to penetrate through, so that the leaves can create starches and sugars and exchange it with chlorophyll for the plant to live. This plant typically these plants typically, and there's some still on there, they are loaded with lemons, and oh my goodness, it is just really cool. So when you start getting these chlorotic conditions like here, that's when it becomes really important to take a fish hydrolysate. So that's what that AgroThrive was. Duram always also makes a fish hydrolysate, and a fish hydrolysate is not a fish emulsion. A fish emulsion is when they would take fish and they would use it for cooking, they would use it for cosmetics. There's a lot of fish in a lot of fish in cosmetics. So whatever they used it before, you get the sludge. And then they take that sludge and they cook it. And then when they cook it, then they take and ruin all the nutrients that are in there. So there's a process that uses biology to use a fish hydrolysate, much better, where they take the fish, and the fish is used for usually cooking. They'll take it, and you see, I mean, there's huge thing. This the coming up season, I did a TV show on this, and we actually see the fish. It's pretty kind of cool. Or you can go online to the AgroThrive site, and you can see where I actually won an award from them. And anyway, you can see the process where it's cold. It's a cold process. They don't cook it, so the nutrients stay in it for a longer period of time. So fish hydrolysate, right? And that's really important when we're talking about organic gardening. So anyway, so you're going to be doing all this. Now see, here we have this. See, we have these suckers down here. I would consider this a sucker, even though it's above the graft. I would still cut these out, unless they wanted to form it out over here, fill it out more. But he's got the strawberries in here. So I would cut this out. You've got great growth on top. As we're coming along, if we want a standard, if we want a semi-dwarf, or we want a dwarf tree, we can keep them at bay, and it's really just about coming in and pruning them on a regular basis and making the right pruning cut. So when we're pruning, nobody's around, right? Let's do some pruning. So here's the example here. This is hurting me to do this. So when we prune, we don't want to prune it. Don't tell the owner. All right. So when we want to prune, leaving this nub right here doesn't do any good. It's actually going to harm the plant. We want to take it all the way back to a leaf. So here's the leaf right here. Remember I said don't cut into the collar? So you come out just a little bit, you prune it like this. Now, this right here is going to come out bigger and stronger. And that's what it's really about, making things bigger and stronger. And lastly over there, like I said, you have he's got the sucker down there. Pull the suckers out, prune these things closer. When in doubt, prune 1/3 of the overall canopy, of their overall site. You're going to be okay if you did that. Right, to keep them either for a patio thing, or if you wanted to even bring it back, you can bring it back, but don't be overzealous and say, okay, today I want this one just to be sucked up right against it. What I would do in this case, if you had and you wanted to grow it in a cordon method, you take and then you push the branch and you put the plant back, let it get used to doing this. Okay, and then as it starts taking hold, then you can slowly take this part, half of the plant off, and then watch it grow. So there's a hospital near where I live, and they have a fence line. It's probably a good 100 feet, and it is a chain link fence. They have full-grown Meyer lemons growing along this 4-foot fence to keep it this wide. It is the most beautiful trees that I've ever seen, and they have no idea, I think, that they're bonsaiing the plants. So it's really pretty cool. Any questions? No questions. Am I thorough or what?
Yeah.
Oh man.
That's the point.
You got anything else there, Robert?
Did you talk about the Meyer lemons?
Oh, I talked about the Meyer lemons. I didn't say Meyer lemons in particular. How old are they?
They are 59 years old.
Ah, see, I said 60 years old, didn't I?
He'll be able to retire soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're getting AARP mail right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting because the Department of Agriculture has actually stopped allowing to have being able to take citrus around county lines. They may have loosened it up on the Meyer now, but Meyers were almost impossible to get over the last 3-4 years. Yeah, because there's insects that are down. It has a really long name to it. I can never remember it. It's the H something or other. But that's the reason. So if you got an existing Meyer like this, oh my, it's good. Now there is a website. I don't know if I don't remember what it is. A government website where you can buy rootstock to grow this stuff on. So if you wanted to take a clipping of this to grow it on the rootstock, then you can create that. There's no reason why you can't do something like that. But yeah, so in Southern California, try to find trees, pears and apples that have the lowest chill hours possible. The lowest chill hours. Those are the ones that you're going to be much more successful with. Otherwise, you got to do the ridiculous thing, as I mentioned before, and icing the plants down. You know, so now where I live in the People's Republic of Whittier, that's right, I went there. What happened was that I live in a kind of like a little valley. I get frost at my house. Every year we have white roofs. I mean, it looks like snow on the lawns. That's good for me if I wanted to grow something like cherries. And for the record, I did plant one this year. So I'm really looking forward to see what's going to happen with that. So, and you can also remember that these are plants, when you put the plants in the ground, in fact, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, how based on the year that they're on, if it was in for 1 year, he's gotten 1 fruit. If it's been in for 2 years, he's gotten 2 fruit. All right, that's actually a thing. If you don't get fruit within the first 5 years, then you don't have to shovel prune it. You know what shovel pruning is, right? Pulling it out. Yeah, so I usually give between 5 to 7 years. And you want to know something? If you got to walk up to the plant and threaten it, then go ahead and do that. And it just might respond for you. So I hope you respond to my television show, my radio show. I'm Nick Federoff. Go to thingsgreen.com for more information and ideas, and go to requencher.com to see all of the blogs that I write and the videos that we do. Thank you. All right, now it's time to clap. That's it. All right, we got anything else, Dad?
We're just going to wrap it up.
Oh, nice.
So I would say I didn't want to interrupt you. So
Oh, you should have.
Puns. So is your lapper's name is Cindy?
All right.
And then with the cocktail plants,
I wanted to thank everybody for coming out today. It's a bit hot. Hopefully everybody's gotten food and drinks and learned a few things. Thank you for coming out. Thank you from Root Quencher and In Deep Irrigation, from Earth Growers LLC, and for Things Green. And thank you, Nick and Brian, for all the great information. Hope you guys had a great time today. And definitely call us, email us. We'd love to talk with you, collaborate with you. One thing that came to mind as I was talking to Brian as Nick was talking is that gardening and maintaining gardens and landscape and irrigation is definitely the great experiment. I definitely have not killed more plants than I've grown, but it is not for the faint of heart. And sometimes when I do less, more great things happen. So sometimes I fiddle with things too much and kill things. So remember that as we go through this learning process together, talking about soil science, water science, and plant health and structure, that we're all in this together, and hopefully we can collaborate together and learn and grow, literally and figuratively. Thank you all for joining us.